Hey there folks, Wrel here. An interesting juxtaposition we face with online multiplayer games is that we tend to have a greater sense of enjoyment when we're stealing that enjoyment from others. A classic example of this is the Call of Duty kill streak, where in order to call in the attack chopper or the missile strike, you have to have already been killing a lot of people or otherwise doing really well in the match to begin with. In MOBA games, if you're constantly winning your team fights, it's usually a fun time. If you're playing PlanetSide 2 and you're running around in a harasser just blowing up a bunch of enemy vehicles, that's a grand old time as well. But in each of these situations, the other side of the coin has players getting farmed or losing all of their team fights or getting their vehicles blown up. And if the goal of a multiplayer game is to win or score high on the kill board, there's naturally a frustration associated with losing or with dying too often. Frustration is both a motivator and a rage inducer, and it's essentially the game's role to frustrate or otherwise challenge a player enough that they stay motivated, but not get them so riled up that they have to rage quit altogether. On the other extreme though, if a game is too easy or if you're playing against enemies who basically feel AFK, you can have a match or a game that feels boring, and that's another thing that you don't want. Actually, the relationship between challenge and boredom and frustration is pretty well documented, so in this video, we're going to be talking more specifically about how some games mitigate the frustrations that their players face. In Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, a player could earn death streaks, basically the opposite of kill streaks, when they die too many times in a row. Poor performers would pick up extra health or drop a grenade on death or fall into a prone position on death instead of just dying outright, as well as a handful of other perks depending on which game you're looking at. The three I mentioned though were pretty similar to the standard perks Juggernaut, Martyrdom, and Last Stand that were handed out in the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare. The intention with death streaks was simply to give bad players a chance to score a kill. It's a sound concept since you reduce the frustration levels of those poor players, but at the same time you are kind of just passing that frustration off to the more skillful ones, and more importantly, even other bad players. Death streaks, as they were implemented, were a really dividing topic because bad players enjoyed them, good players hated them. For the better players, it added a layer of randomness that contradicted the skills that you were developing as a player. In my opinion, they simply could have been done better. The death streaks themselves were really powerful, and they had a negative impact on gameplay. If those perks would have quickened your respawn timer on your next death, or chose a less camped place for you to auto-spawn on, or given you faster health regeneration instead of a flat health buff, or made your next kill count for 2 kills toward your next kill streak, it may have gone the other direction. Of course, there are plenty of other ways to reduce loss-induced frustration, and a personal favorite is just to reduce a player's downtime. Time when you aren't doing anything is time wasted, or time spent raging in chat about how bad your team is. Timeouts are a form of punishment, usually for the sake of game balance. But from a personal enjoyment perspective, lower downtime is preferred to longer ones, and the games that have necessarily long downtimes usually give you something to do in the meantime, either watching your teammates through a spectator camera or, well, that's pretty much it. Games don't normally have a whole lot to do during long downtimes. You're either watching through the eyes of another player, or you're looking at a map waiting for your spawn point to light up. One of those is a little bit more compelling than the other, but neither of them are more compelling than just getting back into the game. I guarantee you though that if you could play a round of Candy Crush while waiting on the spawn screen, you'd see a lot less raging in chat, much lower player frustrations, a reduction in toxicity overall. What if you could even play a minigame that allowed you to get back into the fight more quickly, or play one that contributes to your team right from the spawn screen? You'd see a lot of player engagement and a lot less raging in chat. Heroes of the Storm had an interesting take on this with one of their heroes, the Skeleton King Leoric, and when you died as Leoric, you'd still be able to wander around the map in a ghost form. You'd slow enemies and you'd siphon their spirit juice, and you would in turn reduce your respawn timer. It's a great mechanic that kept players engaged when they'd normally be typing up a storm or taking a pee break. Not so good if you need to pee, but still a mechanic that should find more mirrors in more games. Downtime isn't always dead time though. It can be travel time as well, and travel time can feel just like as much punishment as sitting on the spawn screen. PlanetSide 2 is probably one of the worst examples of something like this, Imagine that your current fight is completely zerged out. You don't want to be there anymore, but instant action keeps trying to take you to a crappy fight. And due to the really strict redeploy system, you can't go to the side of the map that actually has the balanced fights that you want to participate in. So you redeploy back to the warp gate, you jump in your ESF, provided you have enough resources, and you start flying to that good fight that you have waypointed. So you're flying, and you're not so great at pilot, but you know how to avoid trees at least. Then suddenly, you get sniped out of the air by a Dalton, or by a Titan AP, or ganked by a Sky Knight, and you don't die over a friendly hex, so, sorry for your luck, you have to start way back at the nearest one. You don't have enough nanites to fly again, and instant action is still trying to take you to the same crappy fight, so you start chaining redeploys to get where you want to go. This is an example of a whole lot of time spent not doing anything, and it happens all the time. Anytime you don't feel like you're doing something of value is ultimately like dripping water into a cup of frustration. Unless you empty the cup out from time to time, it's eventually going to overflow and you're going to log off. Emptying that cup comes from engaging in meaningful exchanges. So those exchanges need to be often enough that you hold a player's attention and counterbalance just how much frustration you're feeding them. Addressing this sort of frustration in PlanetSide 2 would be done by giving players more leniency with their spawn options and allowing quicker access to vehicles. Maybe the warp gate allows you to always spawn vehicles for free. If your vehicle terminal isn't hacked, maybe you can spawn directly into a vehicle from the map screen or from the spawn room, or maybe all vehicles with empty passenger seats can be spawned into by squad mates. Maybe instant action spawns you directly into an empty gunner seat of vehicles that have opted into it. There are plenty of ways to address this, and they all have their own pros and cons that need to be weighed, but it's more than doable. Another way that games, especially in more recent history, alleviate frustration is by compressing the skill gap. We talked a little bit about this with the death streaks in some of the earlier Call of Duty games, but games can also emphasize this through easy to use yet powerful weapons and vehicles, as well as shorter times to kill. In Battlefield games, for example, you can usually drop infantry targets in just a few shots. Skill compression is basically the concept of moving the skill floor and the skill ceiling closer to one another, and having a low time to kill allows even poor players an easier time scoring kills. Skill compression is a topic that has come under fire lately, mostly because a lot of AAA games tend to take advantage of it now. Some players view it as appealing to the lowest common denominator, so much so that there's been a more recent resurgence in games with longer times to kill, faster movement, and a greater emphasis on the power of headshots. I'm a fan of longer times to kill personally, but I also think that needs to be weighed against the downtime that you subject your player base to. For example, if in Black Ops 3 you had longer death timers, the shorter time to kill, the kill streak rewards, and the sometimes cheesy weaponry would bother players a lot more. If Battlefield didn't have squad spawn and always had to travel these long distances, the use of insta-giving vehicles and weapons and shorter infantry time to kill in general would bother players a lot more there as well. In Overwatch, even though walking back to a payload kind of sucks, the game tends to make up for it by having longer times to kill, because a skillful player can spend more time in the action than time they spend walking back. And even if you're not a skillful player, there are tankier heroes that you can play to avoid dying so often. At the end of the day, gamers and game designers need to be able to point out what causes their frustration, and figure out how to make that experience more enjoyable. In some cases, the players have already been given the tools to combat these sorts of frustrations. In Overwatch, if you die too much as Widowmaker, then maybe you'd make for a better Reinhardt. In other cases, the balance is truly out of whack and can stand to be corrected. Are your new players dying over and over and over again? How do you help even the playing field without devaluing the skill that your player base is trying to develop? Is the player spending too much time without meaningful exchanges? How do you break up the downtime so that the better alternative isn't just to log out for a while? Maybe some of the solutions come from compressing the skill gap. Maybe it comes from reducing the death timers or the travel times. Maybe it comes from giving players something to do while they're dead or traveling. Maybe it means letting players have access to more survivable classes and characters, but trading their offensive capability at the same time. There are plenty of examples out there to learn from, but being able to take a step back and identify what's creating those frustrations in the first place can go a long way toward engaging your player base more and building happier gaming communities. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. And this was a bit of a brain dump with a bunch of observations thrown in, so if you'd like to add yours to the mix, you can definitely feel free to do that in the comment section down below, and let me know your thoughts on balancing frustration. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.